For a long time, people assumed that great power competition would be decided mainly by wealth. The logic seems straightforward. The richer a country became, the more technology it could fund, the more weapons it could buy, the more influence it could project, and the more durable its global position would appear. Economic scale became the most common shorthand for strategic strength. Analysts compared GDP rankings, market capitalization, defense budgets, consumer spending, and innovation sectors, then tried to infer the future balance of power from those numbers. In that framework, the contest between major powers looked like an advanced version of corporate competition. Whoever generated more value, attracted more capital, and led the most profitable sectors would eventually dominate the century. But that framework is starting to look incomplete. The world is entering a period in which disruption is no longer occasional. It is becoming structural. Supply chains break. Shipping lanes become contested. Energy prices swing violently. Sanctions reshape trade. Pandemics expose hidden dependencies. Semiconductor choke points suddenly matter more than financial headlines. Droughts, cyber attacks, industrial bottlenecks, and geopolitical fragmentation all reveal the same uncomfortable truth. Wealth alone does not guarantee durability. A country can be rich on paper and still prove fragile under pressure. It can lead in finance, yet struggle in physical production. It can generate impressive consumption while remaining exposed in energy, logistics, manufacturing, food systems, or strategic materials. That changes the meaning of power. In a more stable era, efficiency looked like strength. A lean, globally integrated, highly financialized economy seemed advanced precisely because it minimized redundancy, outsourced lower value production, and relied on complex international networks to deliver goods cheaply. But under conditions of prolonged rivalry and repeated shocks, some of those same features begin to look like vulnerabilities. If critical systems depend on distant producers, fragile transport routes, concentrated suppliers, or political assumptions that no longer hold, then wealth does not automatically translate into strategic security. It may even conceal weakness by making a system look smoother than it really is. That is why the next great power race may be about resilience, not wealth. The most important question may no longer be who can generate the highest number in peacetime, but who can endure pressure, absorb shocks, replace broken links, mobilize production, preserve social order, and continue functioning under prolonged strain. In that kind of world, power is not measured only by how much a state owns. It is measured by how much stress it can survive without losing strategic coherence. And that is a very different kind of competition. The first reason resilience matters more than many people realize is that modern power depends on systems, not just money. A nation does not function through isolated sectors. It functions through interlocking chains. Energy feeds industry. Industry supports military production. Logistics connect factories to ports and markets. Finance allocates capital, but capital still depends on a real base of production, infrastructure, labor, and physical throughput. Food systems, grids, shipping, telecommunications, machine tools, fuel supplies, data centers, and transport corridors all support one another. When these systems operate smoothly, wealth can seem like the master variable because everything appears to respond to money. But when disruption arrives, the deeper truth becomes visible. Some things cannot simply be purchased at will, especially not during crisis, scarcity, or strategic confrontation. This is where the language of resilience becomes essential. Resilience means more than endurance in the abstract. It means the ability to keep core systems functioning when conditions turn hostile. It means having enough domestic industrial depth, logistical flexibility, inventory buffering, energy security, engineering capacity, and institutional coordination to continue operating when others are paralyzed. It also means being able to reconfigure under pressure. A resilient power is not one that never suffers shock. It is one that suffers shock without systemic collapse. It bends, adapts, reroutes, substitutes, and continues. That quality becomes increasingly decisive when the global environment is unstable enough to punish dependency faster than markets can repair it. This is why rich but brittle systems may be less formidable than they appear. A country may have enormous wealth, deep consumer markets, and global investment reach, yet still discover that its prosperity rests on vulnerable assumptions. If its industrial base has thinned too far, if its critical inputs come from external rivals, if its shipping exposure is severe, if its infrastructure is aging, or if its political system struggles to coordinate long-term adjustment, then a period of real pressure can expose a gap between apparent strength and practical resilience. By contrast, a state that has lower per capita wealth but greater production depth, strategic redundancy, infrastructure build-out, and domestic control over essential sectors may prove stronger in a sustained contest than outsiders first assumed. This is the first lesson. In the next great power race, the decisive advantage may belong not to the state that appears most affluent in stable conditions, but to the one whose systems remain operational under unstable condition. Wealth can buy options, but only if those options still exist when crisis hits. If they do not, then resilience becomes the deeper currency of power. And once that happens, the scoreboard changes. The second reason the coming race may be about resilience is that long-term competition increasingly looks like a test of national shock absorption. The old image of great power rivalry often centered on war, alliances, and arms accumulation. Those things still matter, but the modern contest is broader and more continuous. States now pressure one another through sanctions, export controls, technology blockades, maritime disruption, industrial policy, currency leverage, investment screening, and strategic decoupling. Even without direct war, major powers can weaken one another by squeezing the systems that support growth, stability, and future military capacity. In this environment, the question is not simply who is richer today. It is who can keep functioning when the surrounding environment becomes progressively more hostile. That requires a very specific kind of strength. A resilient great power needs reliable energy, secure industrial inputs, robust transport networks, domestic or trusted supply chains, technological substitution capacity, and social endurance under stress. It needs institutions capable of acting over years, rather than merely reacting week to week. It needs the political ability to make costly adjustments before disaster makes them unavoidable. It also needs strategic patience, because resilience is rarely glamorous in the short term. Building redundancy can look inefficient. Stockpiling can look wasteful. Maintaining industrial ecosystems can seem expensive. Developing backup supply routes can appear unnecessary right up until the moment the main route fails. This is where many modern economies have become dangerously over-optimized. For decades, efficiency was treated as nearly synonymous with intelligence. Minimize, inventory, reduce slack. Outsource where costs are lower. Depend on global specialization. Let markets concentrate production in the most competitive locations. That model generated enormous gains, but it also produced fragility. When too much capacity is concentrated in too few places, when critical components come from narrow supplier bases, when infrastructure is built for cost minimization rather than strategic endurance, and when societies lose the habit of preparing for disruption, then prosperity becomes less secure than it appears. What looks like rational efficiency in calm periods can become strategic recklessness in turbulent ones. That is the second lesson. The next great power race may be decided by who can absorb punishment without losing functionality. Which country can keep factories running during energy shocks? Which one can reroute trade under maritime pressure? Which one can replace sanctioned technologies faster? Which one can maintain social confidence during inflation, shortages, or prolonged rivalry? Which one can keep building while others are forced into defensive improvisation? These are not secondary questions. They may become the central questions of the era because in a harder world, the most important power is often the power to keep going. Because in a harder world, the most important power is often the power to keep going. The third and deepest reason resilience may matter more than wealth is that history rarely rewards powers that confuse abundance with invulnerability. Many dominant states have believed that their wealth, prestige, and global reach made them secure. Sometimes they were secure for a while, but when strategic conditions changed, when wars dragged on, when supply lines stretched, when competitors industrialized, when political cohesion weakened, or when internal systems became too rigid to adapt, the illusion of permanence dissolved. Great powers do not usually decline because they suddenly become poor. They decline because they become less capable of converting resources into durable strategic performance. Under changing condition, they remain rich, but less resilient. They remain impressive, but less adaptable. They remain powerful, but more exposed than their own self-image allows them to see. That historical pattern is returning in new form. Today's contest is not simply between one rich state and another rich state. It is between different models of endurance. Some systems are optimized for high consumption, financial sophistication, and global integration. Others emphasize industrial depth, strategic coordination, infrastructure expansion, and production at scale. Neither model is simple, and both contain weaknesses. But in an age of repeated geopolitical stress, fractured globalization, and growing confrontation across trade, technology, energy, and security, the states that preserve real resilience may accumulate a quieter but more durable advantage. They may not always look more elegant, they may not always look more profitable in the short run, but they may prove better equipped for the century that is actually arriving rather than the one many elites still imagine. This is the deeper meaning of the next great power race. It may not be won by the state with the highest asset prices, the most celebrated consumer brands, or the cleanest peacetime macroeconomic image. It may be won by the state that can withstand embargoes, outlast blockades, absorb external shocks, keep its industrial machine alive, secure its energy base, preserve internal order, and continue scaling strategic sectors while rivals are distracted by their own vulnerabilities. In that sense, resilience is not the opposite of wealth. It is the test of whether wealth has been built on a foundation strong enough to survive history. That is why this story matters. If analysts keep measuring great power competition only through income valuation and headline GDP, they may miss the more important shift underway. The future may belong not to the most comfortable power, but to the most durable one. Not to the one that looks richest in stable conditions, but to the one that remains coherent in unstable conditions. Not to the state that has the least friction, but to the one that can keep moving through friction without breaking. His story teaches the same lesson again and again. When the world becomes harsher, resilience stops being a supporting quality and becomes the main architecture of strength. Wealth still matters, technology still matters, military reach still matters. But in the end, the power that lasts is often the power that can survive disruption, reorganize under pressure, and continue operating while others discover that prosperity was never the same thing as preparedness. That is why the next great power race may be about resilience, not wealth. If you want to understand where the balance of power is really heading, do not just watch the market numbers. Watch the energy systems, the ports, the factories, the grids, the inventories, the transport corridors, the industrial policies, the food systems, and the institutional capacity to endure strain, because that is where the real story begins. And if this is the kind of breakdown you want, not just who looks stronger today, but what kind of power can actually survive tomorrow, then stay with this channel. We are not just tracking wealth. We are mapping the structures that make power last.